If you're on the internet and you see an argument on who's the greatest F1 driver of all time, people usually start throwing out the statistics card, because that's an easy way to measure those things. But statistics only tell half a story. Depending on the statistics you talk about, they don't mention the number of mechanical failures, or retirements, or tire punctures, or accidents caused by somebody else. And therefore, the statistics for greatest driver of all time are skewed. So if you want to actually look at the greatest of all time, you have to actually look at their racecraft, how long they've been successful, and how good they truly are at mastering each and every car in each and every condition. And one of the all-time greats, in my opinion, is and will forever be Fernando Alonso. Fernando Alonso was born in 1981 in Spain. His mother was a department store employee, and his father was a mining engineer / amateur go-kart racer. By age 3, Fernando was following in his father's go-karting footsteps. By age 5, he had his go-karting license, and by age 7, he was winning races, which translated to winning championships by age 9. After winning 3 national titles, he moved to international go-karting in 1995 and immediately finished 3rd overall in the standings. 4 years of international karting led to the Euros Open Series for 1999. He took 6 victories and the championship, which gave him access to Formula 3000. He finished 4th that year, with only 1 win at Spa, but it was enough. Former Lancia WRC boss Cesar Fiorio gave him an F1 test session in 1999, which got him enough time behind the wheel to become Minardi's test driver for 2000 and full-time driver for 2001. Although it's Minardi, so he only mustered 1 10th place finish, but despite what people say, it is the car, to an extent, how you succeed in Formula 1. So yeah, Minardi wasn't great, but Flavio Briatore gave him a test driver seat for Renault in 2002. And after Oliver Panis left for Toyota, Alonso got called up to full driver duty. 2003 did not disappoint. Technically 2001 was his first time behind the wheel in full competition, but 2003 is when he actually had a decent team. He got his first pole position at just his 2nd ever event while at Malaysia. In doing so, he became the youngest ever F1 pole sitter, and he converted that into his first ever podium finish. And he got 2 more podiums, including a win in Hungary that year, becoming the youngest F1 winner in history at the time. However, the R23 was unreliable, and he had 5 retirements in 2003, solidifying his 6th place in the championship. Not bad for a first year at a team that's actually good, and he continued that trend with a new technique of consistency for 2004. He never won a race, but 10 top 5 finishes was good enough for 4th overall in the standings, which is pretty impressive given that the Ferrari F2004 is one of the most dominant cars to ever see a track. 2005 though, that would be different. Ferrari was struggling, and Renault finally got its reliability in check. But don't think it would just be some easy walkover for the Spaniard. McLaren got it sorted out as well, and Kimi Räikkönen was still the man who nearly beat Schumacher to the title in 2003. But Alonso had a flying start with 3 wins and an 18-point lead over 2nd place. I mean, throughout the season, Alonso would only have 2 instances where he didn't finish 4th or higher. Well, technically 3. But Räikkönen started making a second-half comeback with 4 wins for a total of 7 in 2005. But despite the Iceman's best efforts, Alonso secured 5 podiums in a row to win the 2005 World Championship in Brazil with 2 rounds to spare. At 24 years old, he was the youngest champion in the history of the sport. And he was just getting warmed up. 2006 saw the Ferrari everyone knew and feared return, as Schumacher went head-to-head against Alonso. The two of them got 10 pole positions, 12 fastest laps, and 14 race victories over the course of a season with 2 parts. The first half of the season was dominated by Alonso, who finished either first or second for 9 races straight, including 4 wins in a row. But then something changed in Germany. Renault's mass damper system was banned by the FIA after intense pressure from Ferrari. The mass damper was a harmonic absorber attached to the front of the car. Similarly to how skyscrapers use them for stabilization during earthquakes, Renault used theirs to keep the front end stable over the bumps. But the FIA deemed it active aero and banned it, which seems a little ridiculous, but it allowed Schumacher to win 5 out of the remaining 7 races and rapidly catch Alonso up. And after the Chinese Grand Prix, the two of them were tied on points, with Schumacher leading by countback with just 2 races to go. The Spaniard fought on without the mass damper and won the Japanese Grand Prix, while Schumacher retired with engine failure. But that was not the end. Since they were tied on points and you only got 10 points for the win, Schumacher mathematically could still win the title if Alonso retired in Brazil, and he won. Neither of those things happened, though, and Alonso became the youngest double world champion until Sebastian Vettel in 2011. So what do you do when your contract is coming to an end, you're a double world champion at the height of your powers, and you're setting records left, right, and center? Well, Alonso joined McLaren for 2007, along with some random GP2 rookie Lewis Hamilton. Now, Alonso thought that the biggest problem that season would be Raikkonen's move to Ferrari. But he was in for a nasty surprise. Hamilton had the greatest rookie season in F1 history and scored 10 podiums in a row, including 2 wins. Even with Alonso and Raikkonen winning 5 races, Hamilton had a very narrow lead by Germany, as in Hamilton was leading Alonso by just 2 points, which, to be fair, is kind of on brand for 2007, since the two of them were tied in Monaco, and after the 3rd round in Bahrain, all 3 of our title contenders were tied at 22 points apiece. Raikkonen, Alonso, and Hamilton were all tied for the lead of the championship. However, Alonso and Hamilton grew farther apart as the season went on. Not in terms of points, they remained incredibly close till the bitter end. I'm talking about in relationship-wise. It's not Prost versus Senna levels of hatred, but the gloves were definitely off, and McLaren had completely lost control of their drivers. I mean, Alonso essentially tried to blackmail Ron Dennis over the whole Spygate scandal, and needless to say, the atmosphere at McLaren was toxic. And it was getting to Alonso. Mistakes started creeping in, and McLaren was sinking in a war against itself. Both Hamilton and Alonso had retirements in the last 3 rounds, and during their fighting, they had completely forgotten about the elephant in the room. Kimi Raikkonen was making a comeback. After Germany, he was 18 points behind Hamilton. But after China, he was just 3 points behind Alonso, who was in turn just 4 points behind Hamilton, which meant that, while unlikely, it was still mathematically anyone's game in Brazil. And when Hamilton had gearbox failure and Alonso got stuck behind Massa in 3rd, Raikkonen won the race and the championship by 1 point ahead of Alonso and Hamilton, who tied for 2nd. Their squabble allowed Raikkonen that half chance he needed to ruin both of their seasons. Alonso was so disgusted that he quit McLaren and went back to Renault, which was a very emotional decision, and he learned why you should never mix business with emotion. Renault was a shadow of its former self by 2008, and Alonso only got 2 wins in 2 years. Alonso very quickly realized his mistake and left the struggling Renault team again to join his 4th new team in 10 years, Ferrari. and the new F10 was a seriously competitive machine. Alonso had the dream Ferrari start with a win in Bahrain on the Open, before his teammate Felipe Massa started running into the championship lead, and everyone else immediately began getting 2007 inter-teammate rivalry flashbacks. But it turned out that Massa was not going to be Alonso's biggest challenge, because the Red Bull of Sebastian Vettel was rapidly closing in, until the two of them buggered up the middle section so hard that they weren't even on the overall podium. Luckily for our main stars, McLaren totally blew Hamilton and Button's seasons, which allowed the two rivals to catch up. Alonso got 4 more wins in 2010 and 3 more podiums to regain the championship lead by 8 points over the two Red Bulls. So for the final round in Abu Dhabi, all Alonso had to do was finish second and he would be a triple World Drivers' Champion. However, Ferrari, shocker, made a strategic error and didn't pit Alonso immediately after a safety car, so Vettel took the lead, and Alonso now needed at least 4th to win. He got 7th because Ferrari decided on the final race of the season to detune his engine for reliability. Well done. And Vettel took the title by 4 points despite never leading the championship once. Everyone thought Ferrari blew his best title chance after a mediocre 2011 season, but in 2012, Alonso gave everyone arguably his greatest ever drive. The F2012 was the 4th best car throughout most of the season, up to 1.6 seconds a lap down during qualifying. And yet, Alonso wrangled 3 wins and 12 podiums out of the thing. I've already covered this season in depth in its own video, so to keep a long story short, Vettel snuck another championship in the final round by just 3 points after a close-fought battle with Alonso. And then he was defeated by Ferrari themselves. The next 2 cars were so bad that even the great Alonso couldn't save him. And yet again, he only got 2 wins in 2 years. Clearly, his time at Ferrari had put him in a bad headspace, since he signed for McLaren in 2015, yes, the GP2 engine cars. He finished 17th that year in the standings with a multitude of mechanical woes. In fact, Alonso retired 27 times at McLaren without even a 4th place to show for it. He stuck around McLaren for some reason for 4 years before retiring from F1, but not from racing. Alonso had been trying to race at Le Mans since 2015, and Zach Brown finally allowed him to do so in 2018. He competed in and won the Rolex 24 at Daytona as practice for his stints at Le Mans with Toyota. Helped by a lack of LMP1 competition, Toyota decimated Le Mans that year, as I shown in my previous video, and Alonso cruised to victory along with Sebastian Buemi and Kazuka Nakajima. The trio won 3 more races that season and the 2019 24 Hours of Le Mans, securing the LMP1 championship in the World Endurance Championship. So, after back-to-back wins at Le Mans and a championship victory, he left the series on a high to focus purely on IndyCar. He had already been racing at the Indy 500 since 2017, in which his debut with McLaren Andretti got him Rookie of the Year, and at that year's Indy 500 he qualified 5th, led 27 laps, and was looking to be a potential winner until his engine failed with 21 laps to go. Even when he's not in Formula 1, he has atrocious luck. So he tried again with McLaren's new factory team in 2019, and it was such a catastrophe he didn't even qualify. I mean, McLaren was woefully unprepared. I mean, they were so useless they didn't even convert from metric units to imperial units correctly, and the car scraped along the tarmac when it was driving down the road, which is not what you want when you're trying to qualify at 230 miles an hour. He tried one last time at the Indy 500 in 2020, but struggled down in 21st place due to clutch problems. and it ended up being his 2017 event that was the closest he ever came to completing the hollowed Motorsport Triple Crown. So, after winning the World Endurance Championship and kicking it about in Indianapolis for a while, Alonso returned to F1 in 2021 with Alpine, aka Renault, the team he started out with. We're going full circle here. Now the goal at this stage in his career was pretty much just build a team up for future success and maybe get some top 5 finishes, since Alpine was way off the pace of Red Bull and Mercedes. And you know what? On his first race back, he got debris in his brake duct and retired. Oh dear. In fact, he only scored 5 points in his first 5 races, which is not the start that you want to have, shall we say. But then he finished 6th in Baku and then 7th in Britain. This Alpine was actually starting to improve. And then there was Hungary. Now this race was already very strange after Valtteri Bottas played bowling with half the grid into turn 1, as Perez, Bottas, Stroll, and Leclerc were out in the accident, with Verstappen missing half of his car. So it looked like Hamilton had an easy win on his hands, until a rainy restart put Mercedes into a tailspin, and that meant everyone but Hamilton started on the pits with intermediates on, and he, therefore, had to do an extra pit stop, because Mercedes strategists are stupid sometimes. So after the restart, and as Hamilton started making his way up through the field, we find ourselves with Esteban Ocon, Alonso's Alpine teammate. He was in the lead, with no more pit stops left to go, which is something I never thought I would be saying ever, but Hamilton was carving through the field by 3 seconds a lap. Mathematically speaking, he would overtake him with room to spare for the lead of the race. Now, why was he going so fast? 1, he was in a Mercedes when that still meant something, and 2, everyone just got out of his way because there's no point in fighting him. He's going to overtake you eventually anyway, and it's not your race, so why even bother defending? But when he got to Alonso, he quickly realized that Alonso wasn't going to move out of the way, because unlike everyone else, it was actually Alpine's race. The longer Alonso could hold off Hamilton, the better chance Ocon had of winning. So the Spaniard made that Alpine 100 feet wide. Alonso held off Hamilton's Mercedes for 12 laps in a piece of driving excellence. Until he finally locked up in the braking zone of turn 1 and Hamilton snuck up the inside. But critically, it cost him time. A lot of time that he didn't have. And Ocon won the race with Alonso in 4th, Alpine's best ever finishing position. Yeah, I know it was helped by the nature of the Hungaroring being difficult to pass on, but I would argue it's still one of the all-time great defensive drives, and further proved that Alonso still had it. It was just the Alpine car that was letting him down. And in fact, Alonso would later himself get a podium finish in Qatar, scoring 3rd to cap off a brilliant midfield season and beating his teammate on points despite Ocon getting that win in Hungary. Spoiler alert, that was the best his Alpine career ever got. He's gone back to GP2 engines. The Renaults were absolute rocket ships that season, but they were also very unreliable. He had mechanical problems in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Australia, Monza, Singapore, Mexico, and Abu Dhabi, not to mention crashes in Miami and Imola. That's almost half the season written off right there. But when he did finish, he finished in the top 10 with 3 top 5s, including a 7th in Austin despite wheeling off the back of Lance Stroll. He ended up 9th in the standings for 2022, not bad given that he only raced in half of the events. But that 20th century attrition rate struck a nerve, and when Alpine refused to give him a multi-year contract, he moved to Aston Martin for 2023. But from an outside perspective, it was a very strange call for everyone in the world, considering Alpine finished 4th in the championship for 2022, while Aston Martin finished 7th, not scoring a single point until the 4th round of the season. But that only tells half the story. The organization that is now Aston Martin has many names: Jordan, Midlands, Spiker, then Force India, then Racing Point, and now Aston Martin. Over the last 30 years, those various teams have managed just 5 wins. It's not a very successful outfit, is it? But when Lawrence Stroll poured a lot of money into it to get his son to drive, they got a lot of stuff out of it, on top of his son having a never-ending guaranteed spot. I mean, Aston Martin is building a new facility right next to Silverstone, and they set about hiring technical geniuses from both Red Bull and Mercedes. And then they finished off the rebuilding process by hiring 4-time driver champion Sebastian Vettel to sort out and develop the car. And you know what? Vettel squeezed some pretty impressive pace out of the terrible thing, with a best finish of 2nd at Baku and 12th overall in the 2021 season. By the end of 2022, Aston Martin was consistently in the points and ended up tied with Alfa Romeo at 55 points apiece, although they were relegated to 7th by countback for highest finishing positions. So while everyone was busy watching Red Bull versus Ferrari and Ferrari versus Ferrari drivers, Aston Martin silently started making progress up the order in terms of pace. For 2023, testing looked average for them, in all honesty, a vast improvement over 2022, but people are still unsure how good they would really be when Bahrain was coming up. And Aston Martin quickly shut them up. In FP1, Alonso went 2nd fastest ahead of Verstappen and behind Perez, while in FP2 he beat both of them to the top of the table. And then he did it again in FP3. What is happening at Aston Martin? Well, Red Bull was sandbagging. That's what was happening. And they gapped everyone by 0.3 of a second in qualifying. But Alonso put the AMR 23 ahead of both Mercedes in 5th. Then his teammate nearly took him out in the first corner, but even a near miss couldn't ruin Alonso's day. He got back past George Russell and rapidly caught up Hamilton for 5th, who he pulled a brilliant switchback on to take a top 5, and then he just kept going. Leclerc had engine failure, again, which meant that suddenly Alonso went from battling for 4th to battling for a podium. But surely, Alonso, at 41 years old and an Aston Martin, couldn't possibly challenge the great Ferraris. Well, he did exactly that. As Carlos Sainz's tires fell off, Alonso got closer and closer before out-accelerating his fellow Spaniard to take P3. Red Bull may have ran off into the distance with a 1-2 finish, but all eyes were on Alonso, who scored his first podium in almost 2 years. And it wasn't just that Alonso was brilliant and lucky. That Austin was seriously fast, with Lance Stroll coming home P6 despite having 2 broken wrists and a broken toe, which is especially embarrassing for Mercedes since they share the same engine, transmission, rear suspension, and use the same wind tunnel. And yet Aston Martin were 2 seconds faster. So everyone, say it with me, Alonso made a good move! Next up was the fastest street circuit in the world at Saudi Arabia, and things got even better. Alonso pulled off a brilliant qualifying session. Hell, all of Aston Martin pulled off a pretty good qualifying session. Alonso started P3, while Stroll went purple through sectors 1 and 2 before bottling it and finishing 6th, but Stroll got 2 purple sectors. And then, to make this cherry even better on top of the sundae, both Leclerc and Verstappen had mechanical issues, which meant Alonso found himself starting on the front row next to Perez. And then we got to find out just how great traction is at Aston Martin when Alonso out-dragged Perez into turn 1, sent it up the inside to take the lead on the first lap for the first time since 2020. 12. He held on to the lead for 3 laps before DRS was enabled and Perez said goodbye. But then Alonso got a penalty for not knowing how to grid box properly. So he served his 5-second penalty under Stroll's safety car and continued on to finish 3rd, which was then rescinded after the race because he failed to serve said penalty properly. Nicely done. But then Aston Martin appealed and pointed out the FIA's hypocrisy on serving penalties, and Alonso was solidified once again as 3rd position. In doing so, he became only the 6th driver in history to score 100 podiums. And you know what? Despite getting spun out by Sainz during the 20th red flag restart or whatever in Australia, he scored another 3rd place to make it 101, making it 3 podiums in a row for the first time since 2013. But streaks can't last forever, and he had his worst finish yet in Baku. He got stuck in 4th when Charles Leclerc actually remembered how to drive. But since he got 3 points during the sprint race, his weekend ended with another 15 points, essentially another 3rd place. And he rectified that atrocious performance with another 3rd place in Miami. And then there was Monaco. Since Aston Martin had the fastest accelerating car on the grid, they knew Monaco was going to be one of their best tracks. But I bet you, even they didn't expect to be this fast. Alonso and Verstappen went head-to-head in qualifying, and the Dutchman beat the Spaniard to pole position by less than 1/10 of a second. Alonso actually put a fight to Max Verstappen in a Red Bull. Think about that statement. That's incredibly rare this year, and he's 41 years old. Those are honestly 2 of the best qualifying laps I've ever seen, and Max is just in a different plane of reality on his. It's incredible to watch. And you know what? You can say the same thing about Monaco. It was actually a very interesting race this year as the rain fell, and Alonso gambled on mediums in hopes for a dry line to emerge. It didn't, and he switched back to intermediates to finish 2nd, which is, yes, his best result in eons, but we were so close to a potential race victory. Who knows if he actually would have been able to do it? It is Max Verstappen in a Red Bull after all, but there was that briefest of chances, and it's going to be one of the great what-ifs of the season. Unfortunately, despite the internet's high hopes, he had a terrible home Grand Prix, finishing 7th behind his teammate for the first time. But luckily, for the narrative sake of this video at least, he finished strong with a brilliant 2nd place in Canada, despite having to lift and coast for half the race due to rear brake issues. Currently, he is 3rd in the championship, 15 points ahead of Hamilton, and Aston Martin is also 3rd, 13 points behind Mercedes. And I should note that Alonso is carrying that statistic hard. Lance Stroll has only scored 37 points this season, just 24% of Aston Martin's total. But here's the even crazier thing, that Alonso is scoring 76% of all of Aston Martin's points. If Perez keeps self-destructing like he currently is doing, Alonso might have a shot for 2nd overall in the championship. After all, he's only 9 points behind the Red Bull driver. If he can actually get 2nd overall with such a dominant Red Bull as competition, that would be an incredible drive. But you know what, for right now, let's look at the numbers. We're 1/3 of the way through the season, so as of Canada, Alonso has 117 points with 6 podium finishes. He only scored 132 points during his entire 4-year stint at McLaren. He's also scored 3 more podiums than he has in the last 7 F1 seasons combined, which really just highlights that Alonso is one of the most unlucky drivers in modern F1 history. His last truly great decision was McLaren in 2007, and even then he got Hamilton as a teammate. Think about it. If he just scored 8 more points at the right times and across his entire career, he would be a 5-time world champion. And if his engine just didn't break down most of the time, he might have been the second person in history to fully complete the Triple Crown of motorsports. But that's racing. In order to finish first you must finish. And he still holds some pretty impressive achievements. He has the most F1 entries at 366 races, most F1 starts at 363, most career finishes at 289. He is the third youngest world champion and the third youngest double world champion. He is fourth most for podium finishes, only 2 behind Alain Prost and 18 behind Vettel, which means next year, if things keep going the way they're going, he very well could easily be the third best in F1 history by that metric. And he is currently 7th for most wins in F1 history. Now, despite all of those impressive figures, let's be frank, he's not going to win the championship. Max is just too good, and Alonso is past his prime a little bit at 42 years old. But no team, even the peaks of McLaren, Williams, or Ferrari, have won every single race of the season, and Alonso has started on the front row 3 times in 2023. So if anyone can capitalize on an unfortunate Red Bull moment, he's got one of the best shots. If he does score that 33rd victory, he will break Kimi Räikkönen's record for the longest gap between first and last race wins. I mean, he won his first race 20 years ago, and another tally mark in his record books would be a pretty perfect anniversary present.